The eviction officer was halfway up the porch steps when the German shepherd suddenly dropped to his belly and began clawing at the frozen mud beneath the old oak tree. Not barking, not growling, digging, fast, like something underneath the ground was still alive. Deputy Elena Brooks paused with the folded court order in her hand, rain dripping from the brim of her sheriff's cap. The dog's paws tore through wet leaves and black soil with a kind of panic she had only seen once before during a landslide rescue outside Missoula. But this wasn't a rescue scene. It was a foreclosure. At least that's what everyone believed. The wind moved cold through the valley that morning, carrying the smell of pine sap, chimney smoke, and incoming rain. Gray clouds sagged low over Mercer County, as if the entire mountain town had lowered its head in shame. Caleb Mercer sat motionless in a rusted metal chair on the porch of his cabin, shoulders wrapped in an old Marine Corps field jacket faded almost white at the seams. He hadn't touched the coffee beside him. Steam no longer rose from the mug. Water dripped steadily from the roof above his head, tapping the porch rail in a slow, hollow rhythm. Tick, 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 like a countdown nobody wanted to hear finish. "Mr. Mercer," Elena called carefully, one hand resting near her utility belt. "By order of the county court, this property is being repossessed effective immediately." Caleb didn't answer. His pale green eyes remained fixed somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the gravel road, beyond the people who had come to remove him from the last thing he still called home. He looked older than 42. War had a way of stretching years across a man's face like barbed wire. His beard carried streaks of gray. A thin scar crossed the bridge of his nose, the kind left behind by flying metal. Beside the porch steps stood Harold Vane beneath a black umbrella, polished boots untouched by mud. He watched the scene with the relaxed patience of a man waiting for paperwork instead of watching another human life collapse. "This could have been easy, Caleb," Harold said smoothly. "I offered you triple market value 6 months ago. Still nothing." Caleb's silence unsettled people more than shouting ever could. Then came the sound again. SCRRCH. 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 Rex was digging harder now. Mud sprayed behind him in frantic bursts. The German shepherd's sable coat was soaked dark with rain, muscles flexing beneath scarred fur as he attacked the earth near the roots of the oak tree. Elena frowned. "What's wrong with your dog?" Caleb finally moved. Slowly, his eyes shifted toward Rex. And for the first time that morning, something changed in his face. Not fear. Recognition. Deep and immediate. Like a soldier hearing distant gunfire after years of silence. Rex never dug. Not randomly. Not ever. The dog had spent 5 years beside Caleb in Afghanistan detecting buried explosives before human eyes could even notice disturbed sand. Caleb still remembered the sound Rex made before every hidden IED. Not barking. Never barking. Just that low vibration deep in his chest. A warning too ancient for words. And now the dog was making it again. Low. Constant. Uneasy. Harold scoffed softly. Animals probably smelling raccoons. But Rex suddenly stopped digging and snapped his head toward Harold. The growl that rolled from his throat froze the entire yard. It wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. Controlled. Focused. The kind of sound trained dogs made seconds before violence. Harold's smile flickered. Only for a second. Elena noticed. So did Caleb. Rain intensified across the valley, drumming against the tin roof of the cabin. Somewhere deeper in the woods, thunder rolled low across the mountains. Rex turned back toward the tree and resumed clawing at the mud with desperate urgency. Elena stepped off the porch now, boots sinking into soaked earth as she approached carefully. "Easy, boy." Rex ignored her completely. Then his paw struck something hard beneath the soil. Clink. The sound cut through the rain like a dropped bullet casing. Everyone heard it. Rex froze instantly. His ears lifted. His amber eyes locked onto the hole beneath the oak roots. Caleb stood up, so abruptly the old chair toppled backward onto the porch boards. For a moment nobody moved. Rain slid down Caleb's face in cold streams, but he barely seemed aware of it. Because buried beneath 12 inches of mud, something metallic was staring back at them. The rain came down harder as Elena crouched beside the hole, her flashlight beam trembling slightly across the exposed metal beneath the roots. At first glance it looked like part of an old utility pipe. Rusted. Forgotten. But when Rex stepped backward and let out another low vibration from deep in his chest, Caleb already knew better. He moved toward the tree slowly, boots sinking into the soaked ground, every step heavy with memory. The smell of wet dirt and pine filled the cold mountain air. Somewhere beyond the hills, thunder rolled again. Closer this time. Elena brushed mud aside with her gloved hand and exposed the corner of a small steel box wedged tightly beneath the oak roots. Military green, weathered almost black with age. That does not look like county property, she muttered. Harold immediately stepped forward from beneath his umbrella. Could be old survey equipment. This land used to belong to the rail company decades ago. But his voice arrived too quickly, too rehearsed. Caleb noticed the way Harold's eyes locked onto the box instead of the dog, as if he already knew it was there. Rex noticed too. The German shepherd shifted sideways between Harold and the tree, body rigid, amber eyes unblinking. Rainwater dripped from his muzzle in slow, steady lines. Back your dog off, Harold snapped suddenly. Caleb ignored him. Elena looked up. You seem nervous for a man who said it was scrap metal. Harold forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. I just want this finished. Another gust of cold wind swept through the valley, rattling dead branches overhead. Caleb dropped to one knee beside the hole and reached carefully into the mud. The second his fingers touched the steel surface, his expression changed. Recognition, not of the object itself, of the texture, the weight. Military issue. His stomach tightened. Help me pull it out, Elena said quietly. Together they worked the box loose inch by inch from the tangled roots while Rex paced tight circles around them, restless now, breathing hard through his nose. Then suddenly the dog stopped. His ears lifted toward the woods behind the cabin. Absolute silence fell over him. Caleb turned immediately. What is it, boy? Rex stared toward the dark tree line beyond the property fence. Motionless. Listening. The woods stared back empty and wet beneath sheets of rain. Then the dog growled again. Lower this time. Elena followed his gaze but saw nothing except swaying pine branches disappearing into fog. Harold took a small step backward. Nobody missed it. The steel box finally broke free from the mud with a thick sucking sound. Smaller than a toolbox. Heavy. Locked. A faded white number remained barely visible beneath layers of rust. USMC 117A. Caleb's pulse slowed in the strange, dangerous way it used to before combat patrols. Marine Corps storage case, he whispered. Elena looked at him sharply. How old? Caleb wiped mud from the lid with the sleeve of his jacket. Could be 30 years. Harold laughed nervously. Or somebody buried junk to scare children. But his forehead glistened despite the cold. Elena noticed that too. She reached for the latch. Locked tight. Rusted shut. Caleb stood and disappeared briefly into the cabin. When he returned, he carried an old combat knife with a worn leather handle. The same knife he once carried overseas. Rain streamed from the brim of his cap as he knelt again beside the box. The metal squealed under pressure. Once. Twice. Then the latch snapped open. A sharp smell escaped immediately. Damp paper. Old metal. Time itself trapped underground. Elena lifted the lid slowly. Inside rested a stack of sealed documents wrapped in oilcloth. Beneath them sat something smaller. Circular. Silver. Caleb froze the moment he saw it. A Marine Corps service medal coated in dirt. The eagle, globe, and anchor still visible beneath decades of decay. Elena carefully picked it up. This belonged to a Marine? Caleb did not answer, because under the medal sat something else. A photograph. Folded once down the middle. Water-stained. Nearly destroyed. Elena unfolded it carefully beneath the flashlight beam. 3 men stood beside an old pickup truck in front of the very same cabin they were standing beside now. One of them was unmistakably younger Harold Vane's father. The second man wore a sheriff's deputy uniform from the 1980s. And the third man. Caleb stopped breathing for a moment. The face staring back at him had his eyes. His jawline. His scar over the eyebrow. That is my father, he whispered. Silence swallowed the yard. Rain hammered the roof above them, while the old oak groaned softly in the wind. Elena looked back at the box. Caleb, your father died when you were a kid, right? Caleb nodded slowly, without looking away from the photograph. They said he disappeared hunting in these mountains. Then Rex stepped forward once more and pressed his wet nose against the bottom of the steel box. Not barking. Not moving. Just staring at something hidden beneath the documents. Something nobody had seen yet. Elena slid the remaining documents aside carefully, rainwater dripping from the brim of her hat onto the edge of the steel box. Rex stood so close beside her that his warm breath fogged against the flashlight beam. The German shepherd did not blink, did not move. Caleb felt something tightening slowly inside his chest as Elena reached deeper beneath the papers. Her fingers brushed against another object hidden under the false bottom of the case. "There is more in here," she whispered. The wind surged hard across the property, bending the pine branches overhead with a long, aching groan. Somewhere farther down the valley, a church bell rang 3 slow times through the rain. Caleb stared at the photograph again. His father looked younger than Caleb remembered. Strong, calm, standing beside men who clearly knew each other well. Yet nobody had ever mentioned a deputy sheriff. Nobody had ever mentioned Harold Vane's family. For 28 years, the town had called it a hunting accident, a tragic disappearance in the mountains during early snow season. Closed case. Finished story. But stories buried underground never stay quiet forever. Elena finally pulled free a small cassette tape wrapped inside yellowed plastic. The label was faded almost white except for one handwritten line in black marker. "If found, give to Caleb." Caleb stopped breathing for half a second. Rain hammered the roof harder now, the storm fully overhead. Harold stepped forward abruptly. "That belongs to private property evidence. You should hand it to the county." Elena looked up slowly. Interesting choice of words. Harold stiffened. "What? Evidence?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You called it evidence before we even opened it." Silence. Thick and uncomfortable. Caleb watched Harold carefully now. The man's polished confidence had begun to crack around the edges. His fingers tightened around the umbrella handle. Rex noticed it too. The dog shifted forward and released another low warning growl that vibrated through the muddy yard like distant thunder. "Control your animal," Harold snapped. "Maybe stop giving him reasons not to trust you," Elena answered coldly. Lightning flashed somewhere beyond the ridge, illuminating the soaked valley in a burst of white. For one strange second, Caleb could see the entire property exactly as it looked when he was a boy. The porch swing his mother painted blue every spring. The old truck near the barn. His father laughing near the oak tree while smoke from a barbecue drifted through summer air. Then the memory vanished beneath rain and darkness. Elena held up the cassette carefully. "Do you have something to play this on?" Caleb nodded slowly toward the cabin window, glowing dim amber through the storm. "Old tape deck in the garage. If it still works." Harold immediately stepped closer again. "This is ridiculous. The county eviction order still stands. Whatever this is can wait." Elena turned toward him. "Actually, it cannot. You do not have authority to suspend court process over buried junk. And you do not seem nearly curious enough about why a dead man hid a message for his son under a tree on property your company has spent 6 months trying to buy." Harold's face hardened completely now. No more fake sympathy. No more polished smiles. Just irritation. Sharp and cold. "This town needs development," he said flatly. Not another washed-up veteran clinging to ghost stories. Caleb said nothing. But those words landed harder than Harold realized. Because deep beneath the silence, Caleb carried an old guilt that never left him. He had not been there when his father disappeared. He had not protected his mother afterward when grief hollowed her from the inside out. And now the one thing his father left behind had surfaced the same morning strangers came to throw him out of the house forever. Coincidence felt impossible. Rex suddenly jerked his head back toward the woods again. Ears rigid, body frozen. Elena noticed immediately. What is he hearing? Caleb listened carefully. At first there was only rain, wind, distant thunder. Then faintly through the storm came another sound. An engine, far off, somewhere beyond the trees, moving slowly uphill toward the property. Harold looked away too quickly. Caleb saw it. So did Elena. The deputy's hand drifted instinctively toward the holster at her side. "Who else knows about this box?" she asked quietly. Nobody answered. The engine's sound grew louder beneath the storm. Tires crunching gravel somewhere down the county road. Rex stepped directly in front of Caleb now, protective and tense, muddy paws planted firm in the earth near the open steel case. Then the dog did something he had not done once in all the years Caleb knew him. He whimpered. Soft, uneasy, like he suddenly understood they were running out of time. Elena looked down at the cassette tape still clutched in her hand. One question hung over the soaked yard heavier than the storm itself. If Caleb's father knew he was in danger all those years ago, Who was he afraid would eventually come looking for this tape? The headlights appeared through the rain like pale ghosts sliding between the trees. One truck, then another behind it. Slow, careful. Caleb felt the knot tighten deeper in his stomach as gravel cracked beneath approaching tires somewhere below the hill. Rex pressed harder against Caleb's leg, every muscle in the German shepherd's body wound tight with warning. Elena slipped the cassette tape into the inside pocket of her rain jacket and stood slowly. Inside, she said. Now. Harold immediately stepped in front of her. You cannot take potential evidence off private property without county authorization. Funny, Elena replied quietly. You seem very eager to stop me from hearing whatever is on this tape. Lightning flashed again, turning the rain silver for half a heartbeat. Harold's expression hardened. Deputy, if you interfere with a lawful eviction, lawful. Caleb's voice cut through the storm for the first time in nearly an hour. Hoarse, controlled, dangerous in its calm. Everyone looked at him. My father vanished on this land. Somebody buried military records under that tree. And you want me to believe this morning is just paperwork? Harold opened his mouth, but no words came immediately. That silence answered more than speech ever could. The truck stopped somewhere beyond the property gate. Doors opened. Muffled voices carried faintly through the rain. Elena's jaw tightened. Caleb, she said carefully. I need to know if your father ever mentioned Harold's family before he disappeared. Caleb stared toward the dark woods beyond the driveway. Memory moved slowly behind his eyes like old film reels catching light after years in storage. Once, he admitted. Just once. Rainwater rolled from his hair onto the collar of his field jacket. I was maybe 9 years old. I remember hearing my parents argue in the kitchen late at night. My father kept saying somebody was selling county land that did not belong to them. He swallowed hard. Then he said the Vane family would destroy anyone who got in the way. Harold laughed sharply. Too sharply. That is insane. But Elena noticed his hand trembling slightly around the umbrella handle. So did Caleb. The voices near the gate grew louder now. Men. At least 3 of them. Rex suddenly turned and barked once toward the woods. Loud. Explosive. Not fear. Warning. Every conversation stopped instantly. Then came the sound that changed everything. A car door slammed behind the cabin. Not near the driveway. Behind them. Elena spun around. Someone is on the property. Caleb's pulse jumped. The cabin sat isolated nearly 6 miles outside town. Nobody approached from the backwoods unless they knew the land already. Rex lunged forward toward the darkness beyond the barn before Caleb grabbed his collar. No, the dog strained hard against him, claws digging into mud, growling low and furious toward the trees. Elena pulled a flashlight from her belt and swept the beam across the rain-soaked forest. Nothing. Just pine trunks. Fog. Moving branches. But somebody had been there. She knew it. Caleb knew it too. Harold took another step backward. This is exactly why the county wanted this property condemned. It is unstable. Dangerous. You should all leave before somebody gets hurt. Then why are you still here? Elena asked coldly. For the first time all night, Harold looked genuinely unsettled. Another reek of thunder rolled overhead. The storm had settled directly above the valley now, heavy and unmoving. Caleb looked toward the cabin windows glowing weakly amber through the rain. Inside sat the old tape player his father used every Sunday morning while fixing tools in the garage. The same tape player that might hold the final words of a man buried by lies for nearly 3 decades. But once they played that cassette, everything would change. If the tape proved corruption, the county would erupt. Old names. Old families. Old secrets. Caleb suddenly understood why his hands were shaking. Not from fear. From the terrible possibility that his entire childhood had been built on a lie. Elena stepped closer to him, lowering her voice. Listen carefully. If somebody came here tonight because of that box, then whatever is on this tape matters more than property lines. She glanced toward the woods again. But once we hear it, there is no putting this back underground. Caleb looked down at Rex. The dog had stopped growling now. Instead, he stared directly toward the old oak tree again. Silent. Focused. Waiting. As though the cassette was not the only thing hidden beneath that soil. Then the porch light flickered once. Twice. And suddenly the entire property went dark. Darkness swallowed the property so completely that for a moment nobody moved. Rain hammered the roof. Wind hissed through the pine trees. Somewhere beyond the barn, One of the unseen truck engines started again, then abruptly stopped. Rex stood rigid beside Caleb, ears lifted high, staring into the black woods behind the cabin. Elena reached for her flashlight immediately, but the beam flickered weakly before, stabilizing into a pale cone across the rain-soaked yard. "Power line," she muttered. Caleb shook his head slowly. "Storm is not strong enough yet." That answer hung in the cold air heavier than thunder. Somebody had cut the electricity. Harold shifted uneasily near the porch steps. "This is getting out of hand," he said quickly. "Deputy, maybe we should continue this tomorrow when the weather clears." Elena turned the flashlight toward him. "Funny how badly you want everyone off this property before we hear that tape." Harold squinted against the light. "I want everyone safe." But nobody believed him now. Not after the darkness. Not after the trucks. Caleb felt Rex press tighter against his leg again. The dog's breathing had changed. Faster. Uneven. Not fear. Anticipation. Like he sensed movement humans still could not hear. Another gust of wind slammed through the valley, carrying the sharp scent of wet earth and diesel fuel from somewhere beyond the trees. Caleb looked toward the garage beside the cabin. "Tape player still works without power," he said quietly. "Old battery unit." Elena nodded once. "Then we listen now." Harold stepped forward again. "I object to this entire situation." "You are not a lawyer," Elena answered coldly. "And right now you are standing on land connected to a hidden military lockbox, falsified county records, and a dead man who may not have died the way this town was told." Harold's face drained slightly beneath the rain. Caleb noticed his polished calm finally slipping for good. For years Harold Vane had walked through Mercer County like a man untouchable. Wealthy family, business donations, friends in local offices. But tonight the mountain air itself seemed to be turning against him. They moved quickly toward the garage while thunder rolled low overhead. Elena stayed close behind Caleb with one hand near her holster. Rex walked ahead this time, not beside Caleb, but leading them through the dark as though he already knew exactly where they needed to go. The old garage smelled of cedar wood, motor oil, and dust untouched for years. Caleb pulled a lantern from the shelf and lit it with trembling hands. Warm amber light flickered across old tools hanging neatly along the walls. A faded Marine Corps flag still rested folded near the workbench where his father once repaired hunting gear every winter. The sight hit Caleb harder than he expected. For years he had avoided this room except when absolutely necessary. Too many ghosts lived here. Too many unfinished memories. Elena gently placed the cassette tape onto the old battery-powered recorder sitting beneath the shelf. The machine looked ancient now. Scratched silver plastic. Dust gathered along the speakers. Caleb remembered listening to baseball games on that recorder beside his father during snowstorms, when he was small enough to fit under the workbench with Rex's predecessor sleeping beside him. Strange how grief preserved details nobody asked to keep. "Ready?" Elena asked softly. Caleb stared at the tape for several seconds before answering. No, the honesty in his voice filled the garage heavier than silence. Because once his father spoke again after 28 years, nothing in Caleb's life would remain the same. Rex suddenly growled. Sharp. Immediate. Everyone turned. The German shepherd stood near the garage window staring into the storm outside. The lantern light reflected in his amber eyes. Beyond the rain-streaked glass, a shadow moved briefly between the pine trees. Human-shaped. Gone almost instantly. Elena stepped toward the window with her flashlight raised, but there was only darkness and falling rain. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Caleb nodded slowly. Harold backed toward the garage door. "This is insane. Somebody is trespassing out there. Or hiding," Elena replied. Then the tape recorder clicked softly as the cassette began turning. Static filled the garage first. Thick, ancient, followed by several seconds of breathing. A man breathing hard. Caleb's entire body froze. Because even through the distortion, he recognized the voice immediately. His father. "If you are hearing this," the recording whispered shakily. Then they finally ran out of ways to bury the truth. Rain battered the garage roof while nobody dared move. "My name is Daniel Mercer. I served this county for 11 years. And what I discovered on this mountain," the tape crackled violently. Then silence. Caleb leaned forward instinctively. "Come on." The recorder hissed once before the voice returned weaker now. "Harold Vane's father and Sheriff Rollins have been stealing federal land payments for years. They used fake ownership deeds to force families off their property. They threatened anyone who questioned them. Elena stared at Harold slowly. Harold said nothing. He only stood pale and motionless near the door while rainwater dripped from his coat onto the concrete floor. Then Daniel Mercer's voice lowered almost to a whisper. But that is not the worst thing buried on this land. Caleb felt cold spread through his chest. Rex whimpered softly near the window without looking away from the woods. The tape crackled again, and somewhere outside in the darkness beyond the garage, footsteps moved through the ring. The footsteps stopped just outside the garage wall. Not running, not hiding anymore. Waiting. Rain slid down the window glass in crooked silver lines while the tape recorder hissed softly between words. Rex planted himself in front of Caleb, fur raised along his spine, eyes locked toward the darkness beyond the door. Inside the garage, nobody breathed. Daniel Mercer's voice crackled weakly through the old speaker again. I kept records. Names. Payments. Property deeds. But then I found something they never meant anyone to see. The tape distorted heavily for a second before returning. There is another grave on this land. Caleb felt the room tilt slightly beneath him. Elena stared motionless at the recorder. Harold's face had gone almost colorless now. Rainwater dripped steadily from his coat onto the concrete floor like a ticking clock. That is impossible, Harold whispered. But nobody asked how he knew. The tape continued. In October of 1998, Sheriff Rollins and Arthur Vane brought a man to the property after midnight. I saw them near the oak tree. I heard them arguing. Daniel's breathing grew shakier now. Older somehow. Like fear itself had aged the recording. The man they brought here was alive. Silence filled the garage so completely that even the rain outside seemed distant for one terrible moment. Caleb's chest tightened hard enough to hurt. His father had not disappeared in the mountains by accident. He had witnessed something. Something that followed him all the way to his grave. Then suddenly the tape clicked again. Another voice entered the recording. Faint, distorted, but unmistakably different. Younger, nervous. Daniel, somebody is outside. Caleb froze. Elena's eyes widened slowly. Because Caleb recognized that second voice too. Mom, he whispered. The lantern flame flickered violently as thunder cracked overhead. His mother had been on the recording, which meant she knew. All those years, she knew his father had not simply vanished. The realization hit Caleb harder than any battlefield memory ever had. He remembered her sitting awake by the kitchen window night after his father disappeared. Remembered how she jumped whenever trucks slowed near the property. Remembered how she sold nearly everything they owned, but never sold the land. Not once. Because she had been protecting something. Or hiding from it. The tape hissed again. Then Daniel Mercer spoke faster now. If anything happens to me, Caleb must never trust the county records. The original deed belongs to him, not the Vanes. The land was never theirs. Harold suddenly lunged toward the recorder. Turn that off. Elena stepped between him and the table instantly. Do not move another inch. But Harold's composure was gone now. Completely gone. You do not understand, he snapped, voice breaking under pressure for the first time. My father was trying to protect this town. Caleb stared at him through the dim lantern light. Protect it from what? Harold opened his mouth. Stopped. Rain slammed against the garage roof harder than ever. Then the tape delivered the answer nobody expected. Arthur Vane did not kill that man. Daniel whispered through static. The sheriff did. Elena's blood seemed to freeze inside her veins. Because Sheriff Rollins was not just some dead official buried in old records. He was Deputy Elena Brooks's grandfather. The room went completely still. Elena stared at the tape recorder like it had spoken her own death. Sentence aloud. No, she whispered under her breath. No. Caleb looked at her slowly. The pieces fell together with terrible precision now. Her grandfather signed the original disappearance report. Her grandfather closed the case. Her grandfather approved the eviction order through county archives only 3 weeks ago before his recent death. Suddenly Elena understood why the property seizure moved so quickly. Why old records vanished. Why Harold pushed so hard to buy the land before demolition crews arrived. Somebody wanted the ground opened and erased before the truth surfaced. Rex began growling again. Louder now. Not at Harold. At the garage door. Then came 3 slow knocks from outside. Everyone turned instantly toward the sound. Knock. 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 Calm. Deliberate. Human. Rain dripped from the ceiling beams while nobody moved. Another voice finally came through the storm from the darkness outside the garage. Old, gravelly, familiar. Caleb, the voice paused. Your father tried to warn me too late. Caleb's heart nearly stopped, because he recognized that voice immediately. Sheriff Rollins. The lantern flame trembled as silence crushed the garage from every side. Elena stood frozen beside the table, her face drained pale beneath the flickering amber light. Her grandfather had been dead nearly 8 years, buried with honors, remembered in Mercer County as a quiet lawman who served 40 years protecting mountain families through blizzards, floods, and wildfires. Caleb still remembered saluting beside Elena at the funeral, and now his voice stood outside the garage door speaking through rain like a ghost refusing burial. Rex barked once. Sharp, furious. Caleb placed one hand gently against the German shepherd's neck. Easy. But the dog did not relax. His muscles remained locked tight beneath wet fur as the voice outside spoke again. Older now. Tired. I am not armed, son. The words carried through the storm with painful slowness. Elena looked toward the garage door like she no longer recognized the world around her. That cannot be him, she whispered. He died. Nobody answered because nobody truly believed in coincidence anymore. Harold took another cautious step backward toward the shadows near the workbench. Caleb noticed immediately. Do not. Harold stopped moving. Rain hammered the roof harder. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, Caleb crossed the garage toward the door. Every step sounded too loud against the old wooden floorboards. Rex moved beside him without command, shoulder brushing Caleb's leg the way he always had before dangerous patrols overseas. Caleb realized then that his hands were trembling. Not from fear of the man outside, from fear of the truth waiting behind that door. Because if Sheriff Rollins was alive, then every grave in this story had been built on lies. Caleb pulled the garage door open 3 feet. Cold wind rushed inside, carrying rain and pine needles through the darkness. An old man stood beneath the storm, wearing a brown canvas coat, soaked nearly black with water. White beard, hollow eyes, leaner than memory allowed, but unmistakable. Sheriff Thomas Rollins. Alive. Elena staggered backward like the sight physically struck her. Grandpa. Her voice cracked apart on the word. The old man lowered his eyes. Shame settled across his face deeper than age itself. I am sorry, Ellie. Elena's breathing turned uneven. You let us bury an empty coffin? Rollins looked toward the rain-soaked ground. It was the only way to disappear. Caleb stepped forward slowly, rain dripping from his hair onto his shoulders. You let my mother die believing my father abandoned us. Rollins closed his eyes for a long moment. No, he whispered. Your mother knew the truth. Caleb felt the air leave his lungs. Everything stopped. Even the storm seemed distant for half a heartbeat. What? Rollins looked directly at him now. Martha Mercer helped me hide. Caleb stared at him in disbelief. His mother, quiet, gentle Martha, who baked pies for church fundraisers and cried herself to sleep every winter after Daniel disappeared. She knew? The realization cracked something deep inside him. No, Caleb whispered. She would have told me. She wanted to, Rollins answered softly. Every year she wanted to. Elena stood motionless beside the lantern, tears mixing with rain on her face. Then why did you? Stay hidden. Rollins looked toward Harold. Not angry. Exhausted. Because Arthur Vane was not the real danger. Harold's expression changed instantly. Confusion. Genuine confusion. Caleb saw it immediately. What are you talking about? Rollins stepped slowly inside the garage. Rex growled low but did not attack. The old sheriff looked at the dog for a long moment. That shepherd remembers the scent, he murmured quietly. Just like the last one did. Caleb frowned. What last one? Rollins' tired eyes shifted back toward the oak tree outside, barely visible through sheets of rain. Your father owned a German shepherd too. Ranger. Caleb felt his chest tighten painfully. He had vague memories now. Large paws on wooden floors. Warm fur beside the fireplace. Then suddenly the memory returned in full. The night his father vanished. The old dog barking uncontrollably at the oak tree while his mother screamed at someone outside. Caleb had been too young to understand. Rex suddenly moved away from Caleb and approached Rollins slowly. Not aggressive now. Curious. The old sheriff's hands shook slightly as he knelt with visible effort onto one knee. Rainwater dripped from the brim of his hat. Rex sniffed him once. Then again. And unexpectedly, The German shepherd rested his head gently against the old man's chest. Rollins broke. Tears slid silently through the rain tangled in his beard, while one trembling hand moved slowly through Rex's wet fur. Same bloodline, he whispered shakily. Same eyes. Caleb stared in confusion. Rollins looked up at him through grief-worn eyes. Rex is Ranger's grandson. The garage fell silent except for the storm. Caleb looked at Rex differently now. The dog that found the box. The tree. The grave. Not random instinct. Not coincidence. Blood memory. Loyalty passed down like inheritance through generations. Rex looked back at Caleb quietly, amber eyes glowing in lantern light, as though he had carried this mission long before Caleb ever understood it existed. Then Rollins reached slowly into his coat and removed one final object wrapped carefully in cloth. A second cassette tape. Your father made 2 recordings, he said softly. And the second one explains who is really buried under that oak tree. The second cassette tape felt heavier than it should have in Caleb's hands. Rain still battered the garage roof above them, but the storm had begun drifting farther into the mountains now, its thunder slower and more distant, like anger finally exhausting itself. Elena stood near the workbench wiping tears from her face with trembling fingers while staring at the man she buried 8 years earlier. Sheriff Rollins looked older than grief itself. Smaller somehow, like hiding from the world had slowly hollowed him down to bone and regret. Harold remained silent near the doorway, soaked and pale beneath the lantern glow. For the first time in his life, Caleb realized Harold Vane might not have known the full truth either. That frightened him more than hatred would have. Rex stayed beside the old sheriff now, lying quietly near his boots with his head resting across muddy paws. The sight twisted something deep inside Caleb's chest, as if the dog already understood forgiveness before the humans did. Rollins nodded slowly toward the tape recorder. Play it. Caleb hesitated. The old machine hummed softly beneath his hand. Every person in the garage carried ghosts now, and the next few minutes would either bury them forever or finally set them free. He pressed the button. Static filled the room first. Then Daniel Mercer's voice returned, weaker than before but calm in a way that hurt to hear. If this tape is playing, then Tom finally decided to stop running. Rollins lowered his head. The man buried beneath the oak tree is named Victor Hale, Daniel continued. He was a federal accountant sent to investigate missing land compensation funds in Mercer County. Elena listened carefully now, deputy instincts overtaking shock. Victor discovered forged deeds tied to county officials and private buyers. He threatened to expose everything. The tape crackled softly. Arthur Vane panicked. Sheriff Rollins tried to stop him from making a terrible mistake. Harold closed his eyes hard at the mention of his father. Caleb saw pain cross his face for the first time. Real pain, not fear of prison. Grief. Victor died. That night, Daniel whispered through static. Not because of greed. Because men became afraid. Silence swallowed the garage again. Rain tapped gently now instead of raging. The storm was leaving, but the damage remained. Daniel's voice continued softer than before. Tom wanted to confess immediately. Arthur refused. They argued for hours beside the oak tree while Ranger kept barking. Caleb looked at Rex instinctively. Bloodline memory. Loyalty carried through generations. Daniel sighed heavily on the recording. I should have gone to the authorities myself. But Ellie was only a little girl. Caleb was still a boy. Martha begged me to think about what powerful people do when cornered. Rollins wiped his face slowly with shaking hands. Your mother saved my life, he whispered toward Caleb. She made me disappear before Arthur could blame everything on me. Caleb stared at the floorboards beneath the lantern light. For years he carried anger toward a father who vanished, toward a mother who hid behind silence, toward himself for never being enough to hold his family together after the collapse. But now he saw it differently. They had not abandoned him. They had protected him the only way frightened people knew how. The tape recorder hissed once more before Daniel spoke again. If Caleb ever hears this, son, the land was never the important thing. Caleb's throat tightened painfully. It was the promise. Rainwater dripped softly outside the garage. Your grandfather built this home so families would always have somewhere safe to begin again. Do not let fear turn it into another grave. The tape ended with a soft mechanical click. Nobody moved for several seconds. Then unexpectedly Harold stepped forward into the lantern light. I did not know, he said quietly, about any of this. Caleb looked at him carefully. Harold's polished arrogance was gone now. What remained looked like a tired man carrying the weight of another man's sins. My father only told me the land mattered, Harold continued shakily. He said if the county records ever resurfaced, our family would lose everything. Elena folded her arms slowly. So you tried to erase the property before. Somebody uncovered the truth. Harold nodded once. Ashamed, Rollins looked toward him with old, exhausted eyes. Arthur buried more than one man that night, son. Outside the garage, the rain finally began to weaken into mist. Dawn was still hours away, but the darkness no longer felt endless. Caleb stepped outside slowly into the cold mountain air. Rex followed immediately, pressing close beside him as they walked toward the oak tree together. Mud covered the roots now. The open hole still waited beneath the branches where the earth had surrendered its secrets. Caleb rested one rough hand against the German shepherd's neck. Warm, steady, faithful beyond reason. You carried all of this home, he whispered. Rex looked up at him quietly. Not proud, not expecting praise, just present, the way loyal souls always are. Then Caleb noticed something near the edge of the hole beneath the roots. Another object barely visible under wet dirt. Small, metallic. He crouched slowly and brushed mud aside with trembling fingers. A sheriff's badge. Old, tarnished, buried deeper than the lockbox itself. On the back, scratched almost beyond recognition, were 3 words Caleb had never heard before. Not all died. Morning arrived slowly over Mercer County, like something fragile trying not to break. The storm had passed during the final hours before dawn, leaving the mountains wrapped in pale silver mist and the scent of rain-soaked pine drifting through the valley. Water still clung to the oak branches in trembling droplets that caught the first weak light of sunrise. Caleb sat alone on the porch steps with a wool blanket around his shoulders and a mug of untouched coffee cooling beside him. Rex lay nearby beneath the old oak tree, head resting between his paws exactly where the earth had been opened hours earlier. Neither of them had slept. Down the gravel road, county vehicles still lined the property fence. Investigators moved quietly near the excavation site, while deputies marked evidence beneath portable floodlights fading against the morning sky. Harold Vane had surrendered every county document tied to the land before sunrise. Elena remained near the garage, speaking softly with state investigators while her grandfather sat inside wrapped in another blanket, looking less like a sheriff now and more like a tired old man who had spent too many years carrying ghosts through the dark. The eviction order had already been suspended indefinitely. Funny how quickly paper loses power once truth finally breathes. Caleb watched steam rise faintly from the coffee cup before disappearing into cold mountain air. For years he imagined this moment differently. He thought if the truth ever surfaced, it would heal something cleanly inside him, bring anger to an end, restore what had been stolen. But grief did not work like that. Truth only changed the shape of the wound. It did not erase it. Rex lifted his head suddenly and looked toward the tree line behind the property. Caleb followed his gaze instinctively. Nothing moved beyond the fog except wind slipping through the pines. Yet the dog remained focused there for several long seconds before slowly settling back down. Caleb almost smiled. Still guarding the perimeter, huh? His voice sounded rough from exhaustion. Rex thumped his tail once against the wet ground. A small sound, but alive. Elena approached the porch quietly with her hands buried inside the pockets of her jacket. She looked exhausted too. Red-eyed, pale, changed. State police confirmed the remains under the oak belonged to Victor Hale, she said softly. Caleb nodded once. And the badge? Elena hesitated. The serial number belonged to another deputy sheriff from 1998. Caleb looked up slowly. Another deputy? Elena nodded. Deputy Aaron Pike. He disappeared 6 months before your father. Wind moved softly through the valley. Caleb felt cold settle deep beneath his ribs again. Nobody ever mentioned him. Because there was never a body, Elena answered quietly. Silence stretched between them while distant crows circled above the hills. Somewhere farther down the road, a truck engine started. Life moving forward whether people were ready or not. Elena sat beside Caleb on the porch steps and stared toward the oak tree. My grandfather told investigators everything before sunrise, she murmured. The fake deeds. The money. Victor Hale. Her voice faltered slightly. but he still swears Aaron Pike was alive the last time he saw him. Caleb looked toward the badge resting beside his coffee mug wrapped carefully in cloth. Not all died. The words would not leave his mind. Not all died. Not all stayed buried either. Rex stood slowly now and walked toward Caleb through the wet grass. Mud clung to his paws. His amber eyes looked softer in daylight somehow. Older. Caleb rested a hand against the dog's neck as Rex leaned gently into him. Warmth passed silently between them. Familiar. Sacred almost. Caleb suddenly remembered something his father once told him beside a campfire long before the world cracked apart. Dogs do not protect houses. They protect hearts. At the time, Caleb thought it was just another old hunting story. Now he understood. Rex had not guarded land, or evidence, or graves. He guarded a promise carried through blood and memory from one generation to another. The kind of loyalty that outlives fear. Elena stood slowly and glanced toward the investigators below. They are bringing in excavation teams tomorrow, she said. They think there may be more buried out here. Caleb looked across the property his grandfather built by hand nearly 70 years earlier. The porch, the hills, the oak trees swaying gently in morning wind. All those years he thought the land held only loss. But maybe the soil had been protecting truth until somebody loyal enough finally listened. Elena paused before walking away. You staying? Caleb looked down at Rex resting beside him beneath the growing light of dawn. The dog's eyes drifted once more toward the woods beyond the property line. Alert. Listening. Waiting. Caleb followed that stare again into the endless fog between the trees. Somewhere out there another unanswered story still breathed beneath the mountains. Maybe another grave. Maybe another survivor. Maybe only memory refusing to die quietly. Caleb exhaled slowly into the cold morning air. Yeah, he whispered at last, fingers resting gently against Rex's wet fur. I think we are supposed to. And beneath the old oak tree, where rainwater still gathered inside opened earth, the wind moved softly through the roots like somebody unseen finally letting go. On a storm-soaked mountain property in rural Montana, a broken U.S. Marine and his loyal German shepherd uncover a buried secret that changes everything the town believed for nearly 30 years. When an eviction order leads to the discovery of hidden military evidence, old cassette tapes, and a forgotten grave beneath an ancient oak tree, the former Marine is forced to confront the truth about his missing father, a corrupt land scandal, and the terrifying lies buried deep inside Mercer County. This emotional cinematic journey blends mystery, loyalty, redemption, and powerful human connection into one unforgettable experience for fans of animal stories. As the K9 follows instincts passed down through bloodlines and memory, the wounded veteran slowly realizes that some dogs do not simply protect homes, they protect promises, filled with suspense, emotional twists, quiet faith, and haunting revelations. This story explores how grief, truth, and loyalty can survive across generations. Perfect for viewers who love heartfelt rescue dramas, military storytelling, German shepherd loyalty tales, and deeply emotional animal stories. Through rain, silence, and long-hidden secrets, the Marine and his faithful K9 prove that even the smallest act of loyalty can uncover the truth that fear tried to bury forever. With atmospheric cinematic narration and unforgettable emotional payoff, this is one of those animal stories that lingers long after the final scene fades. If you enjoy inspirational survival mysteries, touching K9 bonds, rural American drama, and meaningful animal stories filled with suspense and heart, this journey through loss and redemption will stay with you. Among the most emotional animal stories about trust, sacrifice, and buried truths, this haunting tale reminds us that some souls never stop guarding the people they love.